Hello and welcome to another episode of Full Court Finance here at Zacks. I'm your host, Ben Rains. In this week, we're going to be talking about the growing global business of the National Basketball Association. And we're about halfway through the NBA season, so it's kind of the perfect time to look at the business of the NBA. So we're going to look at the TV deals, TV ratings, apparel deals, sort of the global appeal of the game, the growth of the game on a big worldwide stage, the social media, streaming future, players' appeal, contracts, all that fun stuff. But before we get into the real nitty-gritty of the actual NBA stuff, I kind of want to just talk about sort of basketball as a whole on the global scale, like I said, because if you don't know, basketball has been growing for the last few decades, and I, along with a lot of other people, think it really does have the potential to be on par eventually one day, probably with soccer. You could say soccer and basketball are the two biggest sports in the world. Some people would argue that cricket is sort of the number two sport to soccer, but since really no one in the United States plays cricket, as bad and as egotistical as this sounds, if you don't have the world's biggest economy in the third largest country playing it at all, it's really never going to be able to be a dominant, especially money-making global sport. So basically since 1992, the Dream Team, the Team USA Olympic in Barcelona, basketball has been on the rise. Now in Europe, you have pretty much a pro basketball league where people are making upwards of a couple $1 million a year in almost every big European country. You have a Euro League, which combines all of sort of the countries. You have Spain, Italy, Turkey with all big, massive leagues. You have WNBA players who go to play in Russia, say, in the offseason and can make $1 million, where in America, they're making like 50 grand. So that's how big basketball is just in Europe. But it's also big in South America, Australia, Africa, Asia. So if you look at the NBA specifically, at the start of the 2017-18 season, on opening night, you had 108 international players, so about 25% of the league, 42 countries and territories, and it's the fourth consecutive season that on opening night, there was at least 100 international players, and there was one international player on every team, so 30 teams out of the league. You had 11 Canadians, 10 French players, 8 players from Australia, 7 players from Spain. You had 5 from Brazil, Croatia, Germany, Serbia, Turkey. So 64 European players total. You have legends of the game who are from outside the United States. Steve Nash from Canada, Dirk Nowitzki from Germany, Hakeem Olajuwon from Nigeria, even Tim Duncan, who's a Hall of Famer. All these guys are Hall of Famers and MVPs, is from the Virgin Islands. And then looking sort of to the future of the game, and these are maybe names a lot of people haven't heard of yet, especially if you're not really a big NBA fan, but young players that are probably going to be all-stars for multiple years over the next decade. There's a lot of global appeal there. You have Kristaps Porzingis, who is a New York Knick, probably going to be the face of one of the biggest teams in the NBA for years to come. He's from Lithuania. Joel Embiid, who plays for the 76ers, is from Cameroon. Ben Simmons, who also plays for the Sixers, is from Australia. Then you have Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is also known as the Greek Freak. So he is obviously from Greece. So that's a good thing for the game. Whereas a lot of, especially the biggest sport in America is the NFL, and they basically have no international presence. Really, besides Canada, nobody else is playing American football. Whereas basketball is a global game. The Boston Celtics and the Philadelphia 76ers just had a game last Thursday at the O2 Arena in London that was sold out. But notably, I haven't really talked about Asia much yet, and that's also where the game is growing more than the NBA had ever really hoped. It had been growing in Europe. After, like I said, the 92 Olympics, it really grew a new whole generation of young, talented European players. But since Yao Ming has retired, basketball has become even bigger in China. It's now the most popular sport in China, team sport to play. 750 million people watched the NBA last year on television in China. Roughly like 300 million people play the sport in China. The NBA specifically is the most popular sports league on social media in China. They have like 136 million people following the NBA across different social media platforms. There is now a specific NBA China like branded company that's the NBA owns. They have like 200 employees there. The NBA sold out 24 games in China over the last like decade or so. The Timberwolves and the Warriors just had a big week-long preseason tour in October there. And that is really good for the NBA because China is the second biggest economy in the world. It's the biggest country in the world, and they have a booming, growing middle class. And so for the NBA to have such a stronghold already, even though it's only really been relatively popular since like the early 2000s in China, it's really a good thing for the league itself. And I talked a little bit about television. You have Tencent recently partnered with ESPN for the first time, and they launched NBA League Pass in China last season. There is an NBAChina.com. Basically, there's just more eyes than ever on basketball and the NBA specifically. My mother was in China last summer. She was all over, and she basically said there is a basketball court in every little city, on every street. People are playing basketball at a like amazingly fast rate. It's just becoming booming sport there. And then the second biggest country in the world, India, the NBA is trying to make inroads there as well. So over the last couple of years, they've done some camps. They're opening some academies. This past summer in 2017, Kevin Durant did a big tour there with the NBA and Nike, and he opened some courts and held some camps. So that's another country that the NBA is trying to sort of grow basketball at a grassroots level. And that's a good thing for the sport. That's a good thing for all of the business partners involved in the NBA. The more eyes you have on the league, the more people care about the players, the more people are playing the game of basketball. That's a good thing. And I know it sounds easy enough, and people talk about this all the time, but the difference between basketball and football, American football, is that you can play pickup basketball and you don't need much. You can play one-on-one basketball. You can play two-on-two, and you're not going to get a concussion, and you're not going to not know what's going on when you're 50. And I know that might sound a little harsh, but anyone who says that football is not going to change in America is pretty much lying to themselves. A lot of NFL players today are saying they're not going to let their kids play. Youth participation is down, and that's all good signs for basketball because basketball participation is up. But now I want to get into a little bit more of NBA specifics and not just really talk about the sport of basketball on a global level. So for the NBA, just sort of anecdotally, you have a lot of people who point to star power, and that is a good thing in general. I mean, the NFL the teams are recognizable and some of the players are recognizable, but you could argue that Peyton Manning is the most recognizable NFL player, and he hasn't played in 2 years. I mean, Tom Brady is also a big star, probably the most marketable star. J.J. Watt, Odell Beckham Jr., they're big stars, but they both got hurt this year. I mean, if you look at ESPN has a World Fame 100 list. They do it every year for the last couple of years. The 2017 list, and this basically combines endorsements, social media following, and internet searches. There was one NFL player in the top 25, and that was Tom Brady at number 21. And then Cam Newton was the only other guy in the top 50, and he was the 47th most famous athlete in the world. Whereas LeBron James was number 2 in the world, sandwiched in between soccer stars Cristiano Ronaldo of Real Madrid and Lionel Messi of Barcelona. And then you have Kevin Durant at number 8 and Steph Curry at number 11. So you have 3 of the maybe 10 most famous athletes in the world playing in your American domestic basketball league, whereas the NFL really, when you look at it, a lot of people might think, oh, wait, there's not a bunch of NFL players that are the most famous people. Yeah, well, it's not just America, it's the world. The world's becoming globalized, as corny and as overused as that sounds, but it's true. Television is global. Streaming is only going to change this for the better for the NBA, where people aren't going to be watching it on linear television in 10 years, 20 years from now. So it's going to be just more consumable than ever. So you want a global fan base, whereas the NFL is basically an American only sport. And maybe one of the best things the NBA can sort of look to and their business partners can look to is the age of their fans. 45% of NBA fans are under the age of 35, which is great for advertisers and great for sort of sustaining your business long term, whereas the NFL is trending older. The NBA is one of the only leagues, I think it's the only of the three big American sports. So the NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA, it's the only one that's been able to keep their average age down over the last decade or so, where the NFL is trending up. The average age of an NFL fan is now 50, and Major League Baseball is 57, whereas you have half of the NBA's fans are 35 and under. And then also where the NBA looks even better, especially compared to the NFL, which I'm doing a lot of NFL and NBA comparisons because that's who the NBA is trying to become. They want to be the biggest sport in America, in the biggest league in the world, and their attendance is trending upwards and their TV ratings are trending upwards, whereas the NFL in the last couple of years has been trending downwards. So last year, the 2016-17 regular season, the NBA set an all-time record for the third consecutive year with most total in-game attendance. 22 million fans showed up during the season. The average per team attendance was also up to a record high. It was 17,884, and that's the 13th straight season that the league has averaged 90% capacity or more. So last year, 94% capacity at every single NBA game, which is pretty fantastic when you look at it. And also when you consider that this year, the NFL's attendance was down 3% to its lowest since 2011. So the NBA is going up, where at the same time the NFL is trending downwards. And this has helped the league, this in-game attendance has helped the league secure massive new television rights deals. Because as much as the league and the teams are concerned about in-game attendance, they also know that most of the fans are never going to actually attend a game. So you have Comcast Sports regional networks and Fox Sports regional networks all have pretty much the 30 NBA teams. And then you have ESPN and Turner doing the big national deals. So the NBA's 9-year, $24 billion deal with ESPN and Turner, which is basically Disney and Time Warner, went into effect starting last season, and that represented about 180% increase from the previous deal. So the league is making $2.7 billion a year just from ESPN and TNT, basically. And to put that into even more perspective, that's basically every team makes $88.9 million a year just from the television deals from that one big national broadcast rights. And that basically covers their entire salary cap just for national broadcast TV. And when you think about this, and this is really interesting to me, and I'm a big NBA fan, but I never really even thought about it, of how much coverage the NBA is getting during the regular season. So during the regular season, you have ESPN Wednesday night games. It's a doubleheader pretty much every single Wednesday night for the entire year. You have TNT doubleheader Thursday nights, and then their big studio show, which is Inside the NBA with Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal, and Kenny Smith. It's won a bunch of Emmy Awards. That's on Thursday nights. And then there's ESPN doubleheaders Friday nights. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night, all national TV games. But then once the NFL season ends, on Saturday nights, there's now ABC primetime games of the week, basically. So you have the biggest matchups. You have the Warriors and the Cavaliers. and all of that. And that's good because ABC still a non-cable channel that brings a broader audience in, a bigger viewership in. And then on Sundays after the NFL is over, on Sunday afternoons, ABC has another national game. So you have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of national NBA exposure for about 3 months of the year. And then if you look at NBA TV, which is the NBA's specific cable channel, they have Tuesday night games. So basically they have 6 days of the week where a national TV audience can consume the NBA on a big, massive scale. And then looking at the TV ratings for this season so far, which not all of them are out, obviously, but Christmas Day ratings were up 20% from last year. So that's on ESPN, ABC, and TNT. And Christmas Day has been a big push of the NBA for a long time. So to see a 20% jump in ratings year over year is great, especially when you consider that big-time NFL games have been trending down for the last 2 years. And then as of the end of November, so basically the first month and a half of the NBA season were the most recent numbers I could find as of this recording. ESPN's NBA package is up 24% in terms of viewership. And then TNT during the same time frame, their games are up 25%, and NBA TV is also up 25%. And then Summer League, which is sort of it's rookies and maybe some second-year, third-year players trying to make the NBA roster. That's now televised, some games on ESPN and a lot on NBA TV. Those ratings were up 51%. So this is on linear TV. The NBA is getting double-digit 20% jumps in TV ratings, where the NFL and basically all of linear television itself is trending downwards. So that's really good for the league, and it's really good for the business of the league because that attracts advertisers and sponsors. And another big thing, and it sounds cliche and easy, is that their social media presence, especially in the United States, is massive. And by comparison to the NFL, it's pretty sort of eye-catching when you look specifically at platforms that trend younger. The NBA's Twitter followers, there's 27.2 million. And when you think big sports in America, you think NFL. And the NFL only has 24.5 million. So they have about 3 million more Twitter followers. And then when you look at the English Premier League, say one of the biggest sports leagues in the entire world, they only have 17 million followers. The LA Lakers double what the Dallas Cowboys have in terms of following on Twitter. When you look at the NBA's Instagram, they have 26.2 million followers. And I know this is just followers, and that doesn't necessarily equate to money, but that is eyes on highlights and players and just the happenings of the league. And the NFL only has 10. So it's 26.2 for the NBA and 10 million for the NFL. And Instagram is like Facebook's massively popular, widely growing just video and photo sharing app. And that's good news. I mean, it sounds simple enough, but it's good for the NBA long term. And then this year, in terms of, or I guess it's last season, the NBA's social media impressions, it sounds goofy that I'm saying it, but their total impressions were up 40% and their total video views were up 90%. So it's growing, and it's growing at this grassroots social media level where that's where the young people are at, and that's where the NBA is at because they are a league that trends younger in general. And this is also how you have the big sponsors coming in the NBA. So you have American Express sponsoring the TNT halftime report. You have Anheuser-Busch, Auto Trader, Kia, State Farm, PepsiCo are big sponsors. Mountain Dew's logos plastered on the ESPN countdown shows. And then you have Nike, the big, massive sports brand. This year is the first year of their new apparel deal that's 8 years, $1 billion. That's a 245% markup from Adidas' previous deal with the NBA. And people might say like 245% is a massive gain. And Nike's willing to pay that basically because now the Nike logo is on every single NBA jersey, where as the Adidas logo never appeared on the actual jersey because it was at the bottom that was tucked in. So you never saw it. So Nike's basically like, hey, we're going to pay $1 billion and we're going to advertise on your jerseys because Nike already dominates basketball. I think they have like 90% of the basketball shoe sales in the United States. So Nike's all in on the NBA. And then this year, what's also really interesting and something that probably a lot of other American sports will eventually consider is that advertisers are now a part of almost, I think it's at least 2/3 of all the NBA jerseys this year. So there is a 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch little patch on the left breast of a lot of NBA teams this year. And that is something that might scare a lot of American sports fans who think, oh, we don't want to have this. But at the end of the day, soccer fans have been dealing with this for decades. And some of the biggest, most famous, and most like fan passion clubs in the world are soccer teams. And their jerseys have the logo of a sponsor that is way bigger than the actual team logo. So this little tiny patch, which is generating big money for a lot of these teams, is going to be something you probably are going to see going forward in the NFL and Major League Baseball and the NHL. So when you look at a couple of these teams that have gotten these patch sponsorship deals, you have the Japanese tech company Rakuten, I believe that's how you pronounce it. They have a 3-year, $60 million deal to sponsor the Golden State Warriors. Just a little tiny patch on their jersey is worth $20 million a year to them. The same company sponsors FC Barcelona, one of the biggest soccer clubs in the world. So they're all in on thinking, hey, this is good for us to have basically two of the most recognizable youth-focused teams in the world just rocking our logo at all times. So you have Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and Lionel Messi all wearing Rakuten at all times, which is, it's really funny to think, but little kids are now wearing jerseys that are just walking around sponsoring your company at all times. Their parents are spending $150 and giving it as a Christmas gift, say, and it's just a walking billboard now. So these companies are thinking $20 million for, that's basically free advertising all over the world is how they're looking at it. But that's a big deal. That's the biggest deal in the NBA. It doubles the deal the Cavaliers got. They're sponsored by Goodyear, so they have a little Goodyear patch on their jerseys. You have General Electric sponsoring the Boston Celtics. You have Western Union sponsoring the Denver Nuggets. StubHub, who's owned by eBay, sponsors the Philadelphia 76ers. Harley Davidson sponsors the Milwaukee Bucks. The list goes on. You have Fitbit sponsoring the Minnesota Timberwolves. Sun Life Financial sponsoring the Raptors. Lending Tree sponsoring the Charlotte Hornets. And of course, you have Disney is sponsoring the Orlando Magic. So you have that. That was just too easy for Walt Disney to do that. But so sponsors are coming to the NBA, and that's a good thing for all of the NBA players, all of the NBA owners, all of the TV partners. Just the more money that's being poured into the league at all times is good for basically everyone involved. And this kind of leads me directly to franchise valuations, and that is often a big sign of the health of a league. So in 2014, you had the ex-Microsoft executive, Steve Ballmer. He bought the LA Clippers for $2 billion in 2014. That's $2 billion, and billion with a B. 4 years before that, in 2010, the Warriors sold for what was then a record $450 million. So $450 million. 4 years later, somebody buys the Clippers for $2 billion. And before that, the previous record was $401 million, and that was in 2004. So it's gone from 400 to 2 billion in about a 10-year period. And the way Steve Ballmer's looked at it, in a way some of these other owners look at it, is these properties don't come up for sale very often, and they're only going to go up. I mean, you could say that these guys have all the money in the world to blow, and they're just using this as sort of like a pet investment and they don't really care. But no one's really spending $2 billion to just try to like lose money, especially when you look at the Houston Rockets just sold this past offseason for $2.2 billion. So the franchise valuations are just going to keep going up. I can't really see, especially not in the foreseeable future, them going down really for any reason. So you have now the average NBA team is valued at $1.1 billion. And that kind of brings me directly to players' contracts in the league salary cap, which isn't necessarily tied to team valuation. That's more tied to basketball income, which is a big part of the Nike and the ESPN and TNT TV deals. So the NBA salary cap for the 2017-18 season is projected to be $101 million and then jump up to $108 million in the 2018-19 season. So basically you have $101 million that a team basically has to spend. You could get into the salary cap, but that is a little over my head. There's hundreds of pages. Well, I don't know that to be true, actually. It's a complicated issue. There's salary floors you have to meet, and you can go above it and pay basically a luxury tax. But 15 players, 450 total in the league. The salary cap per team is $101 million. And you have 15 players in the NBA who make $25 million and more, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, especially when you look at there's 3 guys in the NFL who make $25 million or more, and there's 15 guys in the NBA who make $25 million or more. Steph Curry, at the last year of his deal, which is going to be the 2022 season, he's going to be making $46 million a year in an NBA contract. That's just the Golden State Warriors paying him money. This isn't Under Armour or Brita or whoever else he's sponsored by. That's just the Golden State Warriors. So it's LeBron and Steph Curry are the 2 highest paid players. You have 40 guys in the NBA. Lots of people have probably never heard of 35 of them who are making $20 million or more. 124 guys are making $10 million or more. So that's about 30% of the league is making that much money. You have 205 guys making $5 million or more. This is just only growing and growing and growing, and this is all good for the NBA. And it's also good, and this might sound sort of random and anecdotal, the more money that players can make, the more young kids want to do it. The NFL, some of these deals sound massive in the NFL, but basically 99% of NFL contracts are not guaranteed because people get hurt too much. So you hear this massive NFL deal, and it sounds great. Oh, I'm going to become the highest paid player. That's what the agent will say. That's what the team will say. But when you actually look at the numbers, it's pretty much all fake. Lots of it, it's like 20% guaranteed. If a guy gets hurt, they could cut him. Don't have to pay him any of that money. NBA contracts are pretty much fully guaranteed. So you have guys who might not even be on the team necessarily getting paid that full deal. So guaranteed contracts in the NBA, and they're never going to have guaranteed contracts in the NFL. And that is another sign that eventually younger players and younger people who are trying to go the pro athlete route will see maybe the NBA and then sort of basketball in general, because when you think about it, you can also go other places to play basketball and make a decent living. There's really nowhere else to go to play NFL football or American football. There's the Canadian Football League and the Arena Football League, but that's not really a viable option long term. And that brings me to the future of the NBA and sort of how they're looking broadly. They've really started to develop, it's funny, they've developed their D-League, which is their developmental league, over the last 10 years or so. And it's now actually been rebranded to not be the D-League because it kind of sounded like it was a D-level basketball league, which I always thought was ridiculous to call something the D-League. It's sort of the minor league baseball. They want it to become the minor league baseball of the NBA. It's now the G League, which is sponsored by Gatorade. So it's not just like, oh, the G League. There's a reason for it. And they're growing that. There's basically now every NBA team has a G League affiliate where guys can sort of in the season come up and down. You have players this year who have on the same day played for the G League affiliate, and then that night they've gone and played for the NBA team. So they basically want to secure a low-level minor league where players don't have to go to Europe and they can leave college early and then not be basically screwed by leaving college early if they don't make an NBA team, because then they can't go back to college. And then also sort of looking to this progressive future of the NBA, you have Commissioner Adam Silver has come out and been one of the outspoken people towards legalized sports gambling, where the NBA knows that betting and online betting apps and daily fantasy sports is a big part of people's lives today, and it's probably going to become a legal part of people's lives soon enough. So they've been on the forefront of that. They recently signed a deal with Amazon's online streaming platform Twitch for some G League games to be streamed online. So that's them looking towards the future of, we know television is not going to be like this forever. We want to see what we can do. So Twitch is what esports is widely popular on. And then speaking of esports, the NBA is going to become this year the first ever major sports league in America. I don't know if it's the world. It might be the world to have its own esports league. So in 2018, I think about 20 teams will have their own esports 2K basketball team. So that's Take-Two Interactive's NBA 2K league, and that is it's an NBA 2K league where there's players being paid by the actual NBA team to play in a season similar to the NBA for video games. So the NBA is thinking about the future. They have a young audience. They have a sport that has a global appeal, and they're trying to grow it in the grassroots in big countries with massive populations and growing middle classes, such as India and China. They have young stars from all over the world, and they have a game that basically it has legs long term, whereas a lot of people are looking today at the NFL and they might say, or people might say, like, the NFL is not actually going to decline. I don't really know how it doesn't when you look more and more into just not even the head injuries, but when you think about the way people are consuming television, there's 11 minutes of action in an NFL game, and it takes about 3 hours or more on television. That's just really not a long-term viable solution, especially for younger people. I mean, adults might think, oh, that's just how it's always been. But that's not how it's always going to be, certainly. Whereas the NBA, 48-minute games, it's pretty much all action during that 48 minutes. Obviously, there's timeouts and free throws that stop the clock, but it's 48 minutes in a 2-hour game opposed to 11 minutes of action in an over 3-hour game. And I could go on and on about the NBA forever, as I'm a big fan of the league itself and just sort of the athleticism and everything about it. But it's a booming business. It's a growing global business. And that does it for us today on Full Court Finance. Until next time, I'm your host, Ben Rains. And remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot us an email over at podcast@zax.com.